Yo, what's up everyone? And in today's video, I'm just gonna be playing some Dark Souls 2. I know, Dark Souls 2, but just gonna play some Dark Souls 2, talk about basically, I'm just trying to find a way to turn the volume. No audio, sound effect. Today's video, I kind of want to just talk about basically how, I want to talk about new gen Souls games versus old gen Souls games. So what is the difference and kind of what they are? So I would say, I would think about, old gen Souls as Dark Souls 1, Dark Souls 2, and Demon Souls. Those are the old gen Souls games. Right? Those are the older kind of Souls games. The new gen Souls games I would consider to be like probably I would say would be Dark Souls 3, Elden Ring, and Sekiro. And then I would say there's one other Souls game that I would say is kind of in the middle, which is Bloodborne. And Bloodborne is kind of in the middle of that. What the hell? I completely forgot about these guys. Bloodborne's kind of in the middle of that sort of area, because Bloodborne is kind of where they started to make it switch, but there was still a lot of quality of life problems in the game. I don't even know what these are, I'm not even gonna lie. These little pigs or something. Dark Souls 2 moment. Anyway, basically, Bloodborne was where I made the switch. And I kind of want to talk about why there's some people who really like the older games and kind of like, what was the purpose of the older games, you know? Like, why do some people still play them, just why not play the new ones? So, in my opinion, the older Souls games, Dark Souls 1, Dark Souls 2, and Demon Souls, they had something, I don't know what to call it, but it just has this magic to it. And my suspicion about this is that it basically mainly revolves around the fact that the quality of life, as the quality of life goes up in a game, the more streamlined it feels. The more people play it, typically, the more people view it, whatever, just in general. So more people are consuming content of this game. So, that's the first thing.
Are you,
right?
Or merely bearer of the curse?
The next thing to think about,
King,
is not just the quality of life, but also how the overall game feels. So I would say these older games, they felt harder in terms of like, you had to find out where to go and what to do kind of on your own. And the game in general was just harder, right? Not just the bosses. And this is what I would say mainly divides the two categories of game. Basically, one was, the one side, old Souls games, old gen Souls games, were more about the levels. The levels were harder, the bosses weren't as bad. If you knew what you were doing, the bosses were pretty easy. But the levels were, I would say, harder than the newer games. In the newer games, you can kind of just run past everything. You're fine. In the older games, you cannot do that. Especially in Dark Souls 2, you can't do that in this game. You will just get absolutely destroyed. So that was kind of something that I found always to be interesting, was what draws people towards these older games. And I think the main thing is that it felt more kind of untouched. There was a little bit more of a raw, I guess, or real feel to these games. They didn't feel as polished, and in that sense they felt kind of more special, I guess, because they just weren't as polished. They weren't as, you know, especially Dark Souls 2. They just weren't as. There's just something about them, you know, the magic to them. So that's kind of what I want to talk about. Is these games are still good in their own right. You know, there's still a lot of fun to be had in these games. But I think quality of life is a really big. It's actually a really big turnoff for some people when it comes to Souls games, right? Like, some people really don't like quality of life when it comes to Souls games, which I think is fair. I can understand that because, you know, on one hand, you don't want to you don't want Dark Souls to be easy, you know. So that's kind of what it comes down to. So that's kind of the first thing I wanted to talk about. The newer games, the bosses are harder, but the levels are easier, and the quality of life is a lot better. Now, a lot of people, when they hear that, they just instantly think, well, like, why is that a bad thing? But it's kind of one of those things where it's like, you have to play it to get it. And I think that's very much the case with Dark Souls 2 and Dark Souls 1, is you just kind of have to play it, and just the feeling of figuring out where to go on your own, and kind of just like navigating on your own and doing that sort of stuff on your own is really a great feel. And it just feels special in its own right, which is why I think these games kind of have their quirks and stuff, and that's why people like them more. The newer Souls games are more fast-paced, they're more fun, in my opinion. They are. You get more, they're more exciting, right? There's more energy to them. So that's, you know, that's one thing. It's really exciting, it's really fun, it's really fresh. But I do think that overall, there's that adaptability stat. Oh, I ran out of stamina. That's brutal. Anyway, basically, what I'm trying to say is that the older games, they have this special feeling to them. You know, the feeling of uncertainty, the feeling of you don't really know what you're doing, but that's okay. You know, it's a little scuffed. It's a little bit. It's not perfect, you know, the gameplay isn't super polished. But there's this warm, it's kind of just one of those things that's hard to describe. But especially I find with Dark Souls 1 and 2, the atmosphere of the game, and just like, I don't even know, honestly, even the HUD noises, like when you're scrolling through the menu, there's just something so, like, magical about it. It's kind of hard to describe. But, yeah, I really like it. And, you know, it's something that you have to think about. But. And I think the first big change, the big shift, I think, was Bloodborne. Bloodborne doesn't really, when you think about Bloodborne doesn't really fall into either of those kind of categories, I guess you could say. Like, I feel like Bloodborne doesn't really fall into the like, it doesn't fall into an old gen Souls game, but it doesn't fall into a new gen Souls game, you know. It's not all boss oriented, the areas are still kind of hard in Bloodborne. You know, the quality of life isn't there yet, I think. To be honest, in Bloodborne, I don't think the quality of life is really there yet. In Bloodborne. To be honest, I think the quality of life is still, because of the flasks, right? Because of the blood vials, you can farm them. For people who are pretty bad at the game, which is, you know, fine, but for people who are pretty bad at the game, that obviously is very tedious, because you have to be constantly farming blood vials, you know, all throughout the game. So that's a huge turn off for some people. And again, quality of life, I understand, you know, it's gonna attract more players, it's what's gonna get the money. But there's just something, ooh, big save. There's something about, these old games that's just special, you know. Quality of life kind of ruins that mystery and that kind of like untapped, untouched feel to the game, you know. Oh, hey, there we go. But it kind of hurts that feeling in the game where it feels like it's just you. Like, I don't know. And the thing with Elden Ring 2 is it became so popular, right? And then, you know, there's just a tutorial for everything. There's a tutorial how to fucking, like, I swear, there's just like a tutorial for everything. How to like walk forward in Elden Ring. It's just like, come on, man. Like, that's no fun, you know? So that's basically what I wanted to say is that's kind of why people like the old games, and that's sort of the biggest thing when you think about old Souls games is they're different in the fact that it's the whole experience holistically feels like a Dark Souls game, where I would say the newer gen Dark Souls games, it feels like just the bosses feel like a Dark Souls game, especially I would say Elden Ring and kind of like Sekiro. It's just the bosses. Where I would say the older games especially, it's like the whole experience, like, oh, how do I get heals, right? When you're in Bloodborne, how do I get heals? When you're in Dark Souls 2, where are the Estus Flasks? I only have one Estus Flask. How do I get that? You know, where do I go? The path is not linear. There's multiple paths, right? So some people really like that. And that's basically all I wanted to talk about. Have a great day, guys.